Okay, welcome. Lecture 6, Part 6, Moana. We are here. This is the last lecture. This is the final part of Moana. And, well, thank you for sticking through. If you stuck through, if this is your first time watching the Moana lecture series, click right up there and you are going to start with Lecture 1 because then you can understand the entire psychology of Moana and how it could actually apply to your life. But for those people who stuck around, for the people who watched 1 through 5, let's pick up where we left off. For those people who didn't watch, you could just start here if you want to. This is where it gets good. So if you want to stick around, you can stick around. So we'll get to where we left off last lecture. Last lecture, we left off with the heroine's journey and how it sort of played out, and I really like what they did here. So what they did was they took the heroine's journey and they infused it inside the hero's journey. So if we're going to keep going with the hero's journey structure that we used for the first 4 lectures, we could just use this as a necessary step. So, this is where we started at lecture 5, and this is just the trials and tribulations, helping Maui and learning how to sail and, facing this crab, all these things, and, discovering a little bit deeper into herself. All of these things are just the trials and tribulations that happen along the hero's journey. They just infused a heroine's journey within the giant hero's journey, and it's just part of the trials and tribulations, which I thought was really cool. But anyways, here's a hero's journey. Maui is essentially the mentor, and he teaches her how to wayfind and how to command the seas and all that stuff, teaches her all the skills. So really, he's essentially just your traditional mentor, but it's more of a symbiotic relationship, which I thought was really cool. But now let's just pick up where we left off, really at the hero's journey part of Moana, where Moana is the hero. We already got to the part where Maui was the hero. Now let's get to the part where Moana was a hero. So they arrive at Te Fiti, right? Or they arrive at Te Kā, right? And Maui goes and fights him. It's sort of like the mentor and and Moana fight together. Obviously, a little bit difficult. And here's a strong idea, and this was the idea that's really permeated throughout this whole thing. Maui hasn't learned one thing yet. One thing that he hasn't learned is that he still believes that he could fight Te Kā, right? He still believes that you could take your ego and just defeat this giant monster. And this is a really good angle of just, watching Maui's about to swing, right, and try to help Moana cross this little gorge. But the thing is really, this idea that Maui could take down Te Kā is so flawed, right? It's flawed in the idea that we could use this little ego, this little conscience that exists within us, and take down this giant animalistic device that exists within us. It's almost impossible. Carl Jung, he calls... It's funny because we talk about this, and I'll explain it here. So I was talking to my friend the other day, or we were in class, and we were talking about this idea of, flow, getting into flow, and that period where you're just working and for 90 minutes and you just work super hard and you look up, you're like, wait, where did the time go, right? That is an unconscious process. That's a subconscious process. We could really understand that. You can't really just say, all right, next 90 minutes I'm going into it, and then automatically get into it. It's something that has to happen naturally. So you ask the question, it's like, how do you do that? And the clear answer is you can't will yourself to get into flow, right? Just like you can't will yourself to work out every single day for the next year, right? Because eventually your willpower kind of dies out. That's the idea with grocery shopping, right? How they say you win when you shop, right? If you were to bring a chocolate bar and just leave it on the front table, right? Leave it on your kitchen table, you could willpower it for maybe a week, for 2 weeks. You could leave that chocolate sitting out, and for about 1 to 2 weeks you could just kind of push away the temptation and not really have to deal with it. But if you leave it there for a month, and it's just sort of sitting on that kitchen table, at one point your willpower is going to break, and you're just going to, you're gonna eat the chocolate. You're gonna relapse, right? And that's the idea. You take this little ego, which is Maui, right? And then you take this giant unconscious here, this giant, we'll say, controlling mechanism, right? The thing that actually controls your behaviors and your decisions. You put them against each other, and maybe Maui's gonna hold up a little bit, but it's no match. It's no match for what Jung would call the supraordinate personality, which is literally the thing that encapsulates you. So imagine, we like to think that we're above our unconscious, but really we're sort of within the middle of it, because you look at something like your unconscious and you say your unconscious includes something like this animalistic temptation, like a teka, right? But it also includes something a little bit above you, right? It includes spirituality, it includes meaning, right? Those things, and love, right? Those three things: spirituality, meaning, and love. You ask the question, can you will yourself to love somebody? That's impossible, right? We know that. Can you will yourself to have meaning? Can you say, I really want to be an artist, but I'm just going to choose to be a doctor, and I'm just going to will myself to do it. I'm just going to tell myself that I'm going to like it. Obviously that never works. Doctors actually have one of the highest rates of suicide in professions, which is actually very, very scary. And then the same thing happens with religion. I spent a lot of time my freshman year of college trying to will myself to be a Christian. Be like, okay, I don't really believe in God that much. I don't really like this Christian idea of God, and there are so many moral problems I have with it, and it just doesn't sit right with me. But I'm just going to will myself to do it. And, it worked for about a month, and then slowly it started to fade away. And that's sort of how it is, because we have this little ego figure, right? This little consciousness figure, but we just can't control anything that exists, beyond our in the emotional or spiritual realm. We just can't do it. But that's the original sin of humans, and I think that's the original sin of our society. We believe that we can. We believe that we just will yourself to do it, and you could do it. It's like, no, the answer actually lies within here, right? We're going to find how we solve this original sin. So anyways, Moana makes a stupid decision, right? And she messes up Maui's hook, right? And well, the problem with Maui's hook is, he puts all of his ego in that hook, and you can tell that he's still self-interested, because he still wants to keep his hook, right? And well, that's one of the things that he has to get over. So they get into this argument, right? Without my hook, I'm nothing, and she still. Well, this is one of Moana's fundamental problems, and this is the problem that you're going to experience when you go through life. Is you keep acting and doing things that you don't really know why you're doing them. Right? So the thing with Moana, she says, the ocean chose me, and that's why I'm on this. That's why I spent this my entire life going on this mission. But the thing is, she has no idea why exactly she went on this mission. She just kind of went, right? She just kind of did it. She received all these little cues and said, "Okay, I'm just going to do it." A good example of this is in real life. In real life, there was a study. What they did was they gave subjects, right? They gave them money. $5, was it 10 or 20? I think it was 20. No, it was 10. So $5, $10, and then they gave the other group $5, $10. In one of the groups, they said, spend this money by the end of today on yourself. So spend either the $5 or the $10, spend it on yourself and get whatever you want and then come back. The other group, they said, $5, $10, spend it on someone else. You have to give this money to someone else. Either buy them some Starbucks coffee, buy them a meal, whatever. But you have to give you have to buy something and give it to someone else. So then they asked them the question. They said, okay, before you go out and do this, which one do you think is going to make you the happiest, right? So, well, they asked the group, they said, how happy do you think you're going to be after spending 10 on yourself, 5 on yourself, 5 on someone else, 10 on someone else? And the unequivocal answer, right, was, I think I'm going to be happiest when I give $10 for myself. Makes sense, right? I get the best things. I get the best whatever. And you make the prediction, right? We have this internal mechanism saying, this is what's going to make me happy. $10 of spending it on myself. So you go through the experiment, people do it right, and then you come back, and then they ask you, okay, what'd you spend it on, and how happy did that make you? And funny enough, which one do you think was the happiest? 10 to someone else, 5 to someone else, 5 for them, or 10 for them? The happiest group was the person who spent $5 on someone else. And you ask, how does that make sense? And the reason why is because, well, first of all, we feel good giving to others. We just don't do it often. And the problem with giving money to yourself, right, is that it's very fleeting, right? So, for example, you buy Starbucks coffee, you feel good for about 20 minutes, but when you come back to the lab, that didn't offer you, it offered you momentary happiness, but this is not the happiness that we're really looking for, you know? And then you look for the $10, the person who spent $10 on someone else, they felt a little inferior because they were thinking, wait a second, I gave $10, I could have given them 20, I could have given them 30, why 10? 10 is such an arbitrary number. And it actually bothered them because money was so much of a factor, right? It wasn't like I did a good thing and that's it, right? Like I bought someone a coffee or something, like I opened a door for them. It's something simple that you could do to make someone feel good. What they were thinking was, I did something good for someone and money was a factor. So the reason why the 5 group was the happiest was because they did something good for someone else and it was completely in the, we'll say, emotional realm, right? It didn't have to do with how much money you're giving them. It was just a good deed, a good favor for someone else, and it actually made them feel really good. And well, you asked the question. This is the fundamental question. Why is it that we were wrong? Why, when we predicted our happiness, why were we wrong? And that's the unfortunate reality. Whenever we try to predict our happiness, sometimes we don't even know what's going to make us happy, right? And that's the traditional thing of, like, you know, somebody going into finance, accounting, lawyer, doctor, saying, this is what's going to make me happy. This is what's going to bring me success. But the truth is, you really have no idea what is going to make you happy. We predict wrong. We believe that we know ourselves, but in reality, we don't. And that's one of the fundamental flaws in humans. And well, that's the problem with Moana here. So Moana says, I went on this journey because the ocean chose me. It's like, what does that mean, right? She's like, I just felt a bunch of cues, a bunch of things happened to me, and I just sort of went along with it. I wasn't in touch with myself. And well, she's a little bit ignorant here, right? And that's really true, because whenever she says, I'm going on a mission, you better hope that it's going to make you happy, right? And that's sort of the naivety that goes along with going on a hero's journey. And Maui comes back and says that she was wrong, right? So the thing is, maybe Maui's right? Maybe Maui's right to some degree. You know, Moana said, I am going to do something, and this is going to make me happy. But then Maui says, you have no idea who you are. And you have no idea what you want. So how do you know what the hell is going to make you happy? Right? That's such an unfortunate reality for humans, because we're such big planners, right? We're such planners. We say, okay, what am I going to do tomorrow? What am I going to do for the next 5 years? What am I going to do for my career? Right? Like, that's the fundamental question that you have as an adolescent going into the world. And, well, the fundamental assumption is, this is going to make me maybe happiest is the wrong word, but most fulfilled, most satisfied, whatever. And we are so, well, first of all, we're so flawed, right? We're so naive. We're only 17, 18 years old. We don't know ourselves well enough, and therefore we don't know what's going to make us happy. So we go throughout our entire lives and we realize, okay, I thought this was going to make me happy, but I was wrong. And that's something that they pursue in Soul a lot. In the movie Soul, they really say, the guy spent his entire time, he just wanted to perform jazz. That was all it was. And he wanted to become big and all that stuff. But then once he actually reached the top, once he actually did it, he looks at the woman and says, he looks at the woman in the club, the one who he played jazz with, and said, why is this not as good as I thought it would be? And the answer is, you didn't know who you are. So Moana has this realization, right? Like maybe I don't, and maybe I'm a little confused. And this is the point where the grandma comes, right? This is the point where the mentor or the self comes. The adventurous side of herself comes in, and she's almost like a god figure, kind of, but there's a lot of ways that you could look at it, but it's a really common archetype. Like when I watched this movie, I was actually a little disappointed because you see this archetype so often, but that's what makes it an archetype. It's good, You see this in Lion King, right? In Lion King, you have Simba's father comes back. It's almost the exact same thing. In Star Wars, you have the dead Jedis, right? You have Obi-Wan Kenobi. He gets killed and then he comes back. He says even more powerful than you could have ever imagined, right? And then also the same thing happens in Harry Potter, where Dumbledore and all the Hogwarts headmasters, they show up in those paintings, right? Even after they die. So it shows that, well, this is the thing that we learned in the beginning, right? So we said when the grandma died, right? Oh, come on, I gotta find it. Right there. She says, there is nowhere you could go that I won't be with you. And that is the meaning behind them dying, right? The meaning behind the grandma dying is that Moana integrates the grandma into her personality, and therefore she is the grandma, right? And that's exactly what this means. This is the manifestation of that. When the grandma shows up, this is saying she's not getting in touch with some spiritual grandma. She's getting in touch with the part of herself that she integrated. And well, you do this all the time. This could be something that's so abstract, but you do this all the time, I ask the question all the time. I'm sitting there, and let's say I'm in a social situation, and I'm a little bit awkward. So I pick, usually I go with Tony Robbins, right? Tony Robbins, I say, what would Tony Robbins do in this situation? Right? Just asking that simple question. What would Tony Robbins do in this situation? Then I essentially say, okay, I'm going to start acting like Tony Robbins, and therefore I am going to unleash the Tony Robbins part of myself and integrate that into my personality for the moment. That's exactly what Moana's doing here. She says, okay, what would grandma do in this situation? One of the things that Christians do very well, and this is something that they really influence, that really influences their thinking, is they ask the question, what would Jesus do? Right? What would Jesus do in this situation? And if Jesus wouldn't do that, then don't do it, right? And that's essentially getting in touch with your conscience. Another one was Teddy Roosevelt. He had on his wall, he would sit down, something like this, and he'd look up at the ceiling, and there would be a picture of Abraham Lincoln. And whenever he was having a tough decision, he'd look up and he'd say, what would Lincoln do? Right? What would Abraham Lincoln do? And that's a great question, right? Because he's essentially putting himself in the shoes of someone else. He's integrating the, we'll say, wise part of him into his decision making. And that's exactly what Moana's doing here. She's saying, okay, what would an adventurous person do? And what would my grandma do? It's the same idea, because the grandma is the figure, the representation for the grandma, right? So then what happens? What happens next? This is, well, what you must do is a good way of putting it. She realizes, she looks at essentially her past again, right? She goes back into her past and she says, right there, I made the picture nice and big here, right? So this is the tribal ancestors, or we'll say the adventurous ancestors, and in Moana's struggle to find out who she is, right, because she clearly has no idea who she is, she looks to her past. She looks to her potential, her genetic potential, and that's exactly what she did back when she went into the cave, right? She said, right here, right, where she goes into the cave and she sees, okay, we were voyagers, all that stuff, and she says, okay, this was our past. Well, that's exactly what she's doing. She's going back here and she's saying, who am I? I am the person that has the potential to be an adventurer, and I'm going to get in touch with the adventurous side of myself, which is the representation of the grandma, and then also I'm going to see how far my genetic potential can take me, because People have done this before, right? Like, I am not the first person to do this. Maybe I'm the first person to do this in this specific category, but people have been heroes before. People have succeeded in their hero's journey, and people also have been successful. And it's almost ignorant to say, I'm just going to go on my own. I'm just going to figure it out. Because if you don't discover the people of the past, then you're essentially going to have to reinvent the wheel. And it's just, well, it took these people years to come up with the answers. And I think the greatest part about it is the people who spent all this time coming up with the answers, right? So we'll say Benjamin Franklin's a good example because he wrote maybe one of the best autobiographies of all time. He put these adventurers put it in a book, and then they give it to you. So it's like, here's the thing that took me 50 years to figure out. Here you go. You could figure it out in 7 hours if you read this book. That's a powerful lesson. That's what movies are. That's what stories are, right? Stories are, here are the lessons that I learned. Here's the journey that I went on, and here's how successful it was. Good luck. You don't have to struggle in the way that I struggled. And well, that's why I believe it's ignorant that people don't read books, because it's like, you have no idea how much you are ignorant about the best way of doing things. Somebody has been in your exact problem before. Somebody has struggled in the exact way that you have before, and they've succeeded. And they have lessons to carry on. And if you decide not to, research, and by research I mean reading a book is the best way of doing it, but there's also, just researching. If you don't do that, then you are literally going to go through the same timeful, painstaking process of, well, something that's completely unnecessary. Completely unnecessary. Humans have been around for 200,000 years, and we've been writing for 10,000, something like that. So why in our ignorance do we say, I could figure it out, instead of just saying, maybe someone has already figured it out and I don't have to go through this problem? And that is the idea in, well, you see this in Moana, but that's the strongest idea in Lion King, right? The Lion King is the idea of the circle of life. The circle of life says that each generation must progress on top of each other. I think that it was a line in Dead Poet Society. It was a great line where they say, Robin Williams' character, he says, humanity itself is just a poem, and all I must do is add another line. And I like that, because exactly what it says is each generation just must take the lessons from the previous generation, the good things that they had, and build upon it, and then all the bad things, take off of it. You don't have to reinvent the wheel when you do everything. It's like whenever you say you're going to go on a... This is the biggest problem I see with people who want to, we'll say, quit whatever, right? Quitting smoking is the best example. So when people try to quit smoking, it's a sad thing. They say, okay, I'm just going to take my Juul, right? Usually Juul, but we'll say cigarettes also. I'm just going to take it, throw it down in the toilet, and flush, and it's the beginning of my new life. How wonderful, right? Unfortunately, that strategy has a 95% failure rate. 95%. Simple. And for the people who try that strategy, on average, it takes them 9 times to quit. And that doesn't include the amount of people that quit before they hit the 9th time. Right? 9 attempts. How insane is that? But then, if you were to, we'll say, read a book on it, right? Which is exactly why I wrote this book, right? But quick plug. But or like I read Alan Carr's what was it? Alan Carr's Easy Way to Stop Smoking. That method has he claims that it's a lot better than what the scientific studies have shown. So you don't really know, but Alan Carr has a method that he worked with smokers and had a great method that worked in his clinical practice and he was making money off this. It's like, why not just read his 100-page book? Or, in my case, I made a 150-page book just to attain a simple amount of wisdom that will increase your likelihood of success and make sure that you don't have to do this rigorous testing. Why not just, learn from the people of the past? That's one of the things that baffles my mind. We don't have this instinct doesn't lie within us. We never developed this instinct to learn from people of the past. And, the only way that I really see people trying to learn from that is through stories. And stories, the problem with stories is they're incredibly abstract. If you look at something like a story, it's like, it's not obvious that this is the meaning behind it, right? It's like you have to spend a lot of time thinking about it, and that's why I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. But it's not, the amount of lessons that you actually get from it are very, very slim, and it's hard to take the lessons that you apply from a story and apply it to your real life. That's the exact reason why I created this series, and that's the exact reason why I wrote my book, because I said, my whole purpose of all this is to really bridge the gap between stories and factual information, or we'll say helpful information, right? Because if you could take a story like Moana and make it factual and make it interesting, then you have something that people will watch, and then you also have something that people will learn from. The problem with stories is that people don't learn from it as much. It's a little too, we'll say, encoded. And, that's why you should, we'll say, encounter the genetic potential of the past. That's why you should encounter, in Moana's case, the grandpa, right? Or we'll say the ancestors. Or by ancestors, you could abstract and say someone like Benjamin Franklin. He's just another human who has gone through the struggles before and knows what to do. And that's what Moana does. So this is what happens when you engage in a good story, or you engage in a book. You don't take the lessons and, like something like Benjamin Franklin, right? If you read his autobiography, it's not like you just take the lessons and take them at face value and you're like, okay, maybe I should do this, 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 and this. You take it and you apply it to your life, right? So you say, okay, I agree with that rule, I disagree with that rule, and maybe I could take, we'll say, he had one rule about alcohol, right, about temperance. So let's say one of his rules was drink only to elevation, not to dullness, something like that. And that's a good rule. So maybe you take that and you say, all right, maybe I've been drinking a little too much and maybe I should apply that to my life. But if you don't drink, then you don't really care. Then it doesn't really matter. So the whole purpose is you take the lessons from the past, you take the genetic potential, if you want to look at it that way, from the past, and you apply it to you. And therefore, you could take that understanding and then help it understand, or help that derive who you are, right? Through an introspective process, you could say, wait a second, this really stuck out to me, therefore I'm going to apply it to my life, and therefore I understand myself a little bit better. And that's exactly what it means when she comes to this big conclusion at the end, which is really cliche in my opinion, where she goes, I am Moana, right? Where she says, I am Moana, I know who I am, and I know, the more important thing is, I know why I'm doing this. Right? I know why I am going on my goals in the first place. This is not something where I'm just going to, where I'm just stumbling along like a child. This is a maturity process. This is a mature moment, right? And you see this in the Matrix, right? It's the same thing, right? Where, in the Matrix, they say, like, who are you? And he says, I am Neo. That's his name. And he just, goes into God mode essentially and just like wins, just super simple, I think it's cliche, but it's a little bit too direct, but it works for me. So she says, I am Moana. She finds out who she is, and not only that, but she finds out what her individual goal is in relation to progress, you could say, right? Whatever her goal is, she says this is, oh yes, in relation to her, right? She goes into saying, okay, I know exactly what is going to work for me. And that's a good way of putting it, because, you think there are these, especially for that was exactly what I was saying with Benjamin Franklin. He has this idea, right? And these were the 13 ideas. He had 13 rules. His 13 rules were things that worked for him, right? But maybe only 7 of those work for you, but that's okay, right? That's the purpose. You need to determine how everything could help you understand yourself. And then you say, okay, if I apply these 7 rules, if I apply the life lessons that I could take from, we'll say, this lecture series, then this is going to help me. And that's all that really matters, right? This is going to help me on my individual mission. And, well, that's the thing. Who cares about the other six lessons? They're not going to help you. So that's what you do, right? That's what you do. You take everything to see how it helps you. So then, I forgot to say this. Before she met the grandma, she threw the heart of Tafiti away. So she gets the heart of Tafiti. Grandma's gone. She realizes, okay, I had this amazing experience, and now I'm on my own. Now I got to do it. So she has this, motivation where she's actually, aligned, like her values and her understanding of herself and her goal structure are completely aligned. And then you could say that she's ready, right? You could say that she's ready to face Tekka. So she goes and she faces Tekka, and she looks. So it's funny, right? So she looks like she's about screwed, and then obviously Maui comes back, and Maui clearly still hasn't learned, which is quite the problem, right? Because we came to the conclusion in the beginning that original sin is this, right? Where Maui takes the hook, tries to hit Tekka, and he fails, right? So what does Maui do again? He does essentially the same exact thing, which, well, hopefully he learns by the end. There's really no clear indication that Maui learns, but we learn because Moana learns. So Maui tries to fight Tekka, and once again we realize that is not going to work, right? You see, he lost his hook, right? But that's the whole purpose. The whole purpose of Maui's character is he's an egotistical guy who left and is only focused on himself. But finally, he does an act that is out of the area of his self-interest, right? So he's not self-interested. He's doing this by sacrificing himself. You see that same idea in Han Solo, like the Han Solo character, where super egotistical, super self-interested, right? But then in episode 4, he comes back and he saves Luke, and they blow up the Death Star, right? Same thing with Loki in Thor, right? Same idea. Super egotistical, really self-interested, always deceives his brother Thor, but then he does the good thing. And then you also have, what was the other one? Professor Snape in Harry Potter. It's the same thing, really teetering the edge between good and evil, because that's what the ego is. It's like if you're possessed by your ego, you could either have the good part of it or the bad part of it, and well, it's a matter of which one you get to choose. And obviously in all these hero stories, you have the egotistical character who finally says, maybe I'm going to pursue something that goes beyond self-interest. I'm going to pursue life, and that is the end of the heroine's journey, right? That is how Maui goes from a self-interested character, which, if we're going to go into the sexual metaphor, because that's exactly what it is. This movie takes sex completely out of the picture, but like a heroine's journey is all about sex. Like that is exactly what it is. You take a male character, right? You take a guy, right? And you who's aggressive, egotistical, and then you tame him, right? And then you have kids with him because he's going to be a good father and he's going to be protective, right? That's the evolutionary hero's journey. And if you want to learn more about that, that's what the entire lecture 5 was about. So if you look at that from a sexual perspective, you could say, okay, maybe the male is self-interested. Self-interest could represent the fact that he only wants to have sex, and that's essentially what males are, Males are very good at separating sex and emotion. Women, or at least in our society, women not as much. So so that's the representation of the egotistical hero. And I'm reading this book. It's called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, and it's a really good book. Like, what they take is the female literature that they read, like the romantic and erotic literature, and they say, what are the guys like? What are the girls like? And what is this archetype that really exists? And one of the archetypes is the womanizer, right? Who has sex with all the women, right? Who's incredibly self-interested. That's Beauty and the Beast. That's there was one other one. Cinderella. It's the same thing, where the prince, essentially gets to choose whichever girl he wants. And obviously then what happens is he chooses Cinderella, and then the woman gets to tame him. The woman gets to say, okay, there are a billion women that you could choose, but you're going to choose me, and you're going to put away your self-interest, which is sex in that case, for something that's a little bit out of your self-interest, which is love, right? Which requires sacrifice and meaning and life itself. You could say love is a representation of life itself. So well, that's the heroine's journey, like through and through, if you want to go with that. And watch Beauty and the Beast. I'm actually making a Beauty and the Beast lecture right now, and that's like the, we'll say, archetypal meaning. So Maui lets her pass, and we'll say maybe that's the end of the heroine's journey. And now you have Moana gets to go on her hero's journey, and she finds, okay, I have to restore the heart to Te Fiti, and she finds that Te Fiti is gone. And here's something that you could see, this is, it's subtle, but I caught this. I was happy about this. You see there's the figure, the woman here, right? Like, here's her hair, here's her face, here's her feet, right? And you have this figure of the woman here, and you could say that literally life itself was removed, right? And was removed from the land. I like that. So, and then where does life exist? Life exists in Te Ka. So here's the final lesson that we're going to learn from this. And this was the thing that I've been building up for this whole time, and this is why I wanted to do Moana, so I'm very excited about this. This is the right way of doing a movie. This is the right way. This is the way that I want every single movie to be made. I think this is so good, the way that they end this movie. Because when you look at... Okay, so we'll back this up. So when you look at the fundamental flaw, is we believe that we could fight our nature. We believe that we could fight our impulse. And if you look at almost every single hero story, right, where the hero fights the dragon, or the hero, slays just the bad guy, right? Harry Potter kills Voldemort, how the Avengers kill Thanos, you could say that is the wrong way of looking at it. There's another interpretation that I think works, and that's the interpretation of you're fighting off a potential part of you, right? A potential manifestation of you. So, like, for example, you have person A, and person A could go on path 1 or path 2. And you could say Harry Potter could have been Harry Potter, but he also has the potential to be Voldemort, because Voldemort is, well, they're essentially equal, right? That's one of the biggest parts, Harry has a part of Voldemort, which is his scar as a kid, right? And they're tagged as equals. They're essentially equal in power, equal in scope as they go along. And well, so when Harry decides to fight Voldemort, right, he's essentially saying, I'm gonna choose path A, right, which is the Harry Potter path, and I'm gonna defeat the potential avatar that I could be, the potential person B that I could be, and if I beat off that person, that manifestation of my potential self, then I become person A. That's the confrontation understanding, and that's really well done in The Lion King, where you have Simba and Scar, and in an alternate world, which is exactly what this sort of potential future scenario looks like, Simba could easily be Scar. He could easily be the resentful dictator who mistreats all of his people, right? But when Simba decides to defeat Scar, he's saying, I'm defeating that potential person of myself, that manifestation of my personality, that manifestation of my ego is not, it's gone, and I'm going to choose to be Simba. That's the confrontation, we'll say symbolism, but it's a little encoded, because then it could also be a representation of repression, right? Where you're saying, okay, I have, for example, let me see if I could find a good example. Well, someone like the Avengers and Thanos, when you look at the Avengers movies, it's like Thanos. It's not very clear that Thanos is a villain. Like the makers of the Avengers movies, the Russo brothers, they wanted to name Avengers Infinity War, the third Avengers movie, they wanted to name it Thanos instead of Avengers Infinity War, because it was essentially the hero's journey of Thanos, if you really watch it. And they couldn't, because they were, you were essentially heroizing? We'll do it. We're heroizing a villain, right? But it's not clear that he's a villain, because he's very rational, he's very well put together, and to say that you're going to defeat him, to say that you're going to fight him is, well, that's the problem that a lot of people have with Muslims, right? Muslims, they have this idea of the holy war, right? The holy war and fighting and violence and all these things. And, well, it's not wrong, right? It's not wrong if you say maybe you're fighting off this wrong manifestation of yourself, but at the same time, you have to look deeper behind the symbolism. In Moana, however, it shows the correct path in Jung's interpretation, as well as the, as well as the psychological interpretation. So I could go through it. So you have clearly now it becomes obvious to Moana that Te Fiti and Te Ka are the same person, right? So Moana realizes, okay, everybody in the past says that maybe we should fight off the innate parts of ourselves, right? We should fight off life, right? And that is the original sin. That is Maui's sin, where he says maybe we should fight off the animal side of myself, and that's the representation of fighting off sexual impulses, aggression, right? And bisexuality, as well as fighting sleep. We went through all this by repressing ourselves, which is the creator of Te Ka, which is the part that creates the negative manifestation of, whatever, right? Like, we'll say if you're low on sleep, and sleep is a representation of life, then you're going to turn into Te Ka, because you're going to be angry, you're going to be mean. That's something that was actually proven. You look at like managers. If a manager is low on sleep, his employees will rate him more abusive and more aggressive the following day. So I mean, it's actually true, right? This actually reigns true. And Moana says, I'm going to show it life, because it is life itself. Maybe I'm not going to choose to fight it, and she chooses to, we'll say, love it. Like show it respect is a better way of saying it. And then what does she do? She puts it back, right? And she puts the heart of Te Fiti back into Te Fiti. And the meaning behind that is so beautiful. The meaning behind that is, instead of fighting against your unconscious, maybe you should work with it. Maybe you should work with it. Think back to the idea that I put up before, that if you say that you're going to work out 20 hours a month, and you actually work out 6, then maybe you shouldn't say you're going to work out 25 the next month. Maybe you should say 10. Maybe you should Jordan Peterson says you should negotiate with yourself. So, if you're creating a schedule for your day, maybe if you haven't worked out in a while, maybe you shouldn't say I'm going to work out 3 hours today, and then I'm going to put in 6 hours of work, and then maybe I'm going to read for the next 5 hours, and then that's my day. Because if you do that, then you're never going to get your feet off the ground, because then your unconscious is going to, you're going to turn it to tekka, because you're repressing the part of you that wants to relax. That's a part of you, Think about it as like Garfield, right? It's the Garfield part of you. I like to think of it that way, because he's a potential manifestation of yourself. Winnie the Pooh, same character, right? And maybe you shouldn't fight it. Maybe you should compromise, and maybe you should negotiate with yourself and say, you know what? I haven't worked out that much. I should work out maybe 10 minutes tomorrow. Just 10 minutes. Just one little change, one little 10-minute change, and then you slowly build it up. And then slowly you get to... so here's the idea. So then slowly you get to work with your unconscious, and the part of you that has control over your behavior is going to be the goddess, right? It's not going to be tekka. And that's exactly what I mean. So when I say that, we often say, this is what these are my values, right? I value this, and these are my intentions, right? I intend to be going to the gym, but our intentions don't always match our behaviors, right? Like, I intend to go to the gym, but I don't go to the gym. There's a disconnect, and the disconnect is tekka, right? The disconnect is that there's a negative manifestation of, we'll say, laziness, right? So what is the answer? Maybe it is to slowly but surely not use tekka and just push them off and say, I'm not going to be lazy today. I am going to work 16 hours straight, or I'm going to, I'm going to work out 25 hours this month, or whatever. Or I'm going to work out an hour tomorrow. Maybe that's too much, right? Maybe working out for an hour, even though you worked out for an hour in the past, is too much, because you are repressing the Garfield part of you that has taken over your psyche, right? That has taken over your consciousness. So what must you do? You must work with it, right? And soon, maybe you work out, this is what I did. You work out for 5 minutes. The next day. That's it. 5 minutes. And then 5 minutes the next day. Because if you work out for an hour one day, you're not going to want to work out for an hour the next day. So if you could work out for five minutes over 30 days straight, right? You don't even have to feel sore. Call that an accomplishment, because that really is an accomplishment. The problem is really consistency, right? And then you could bring it from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, and 10 minutes to 15 minutes. And you could keep working with your unconscious. You could keep, showing the goddess within you, and we'll say telling the Garfield part of you, right, the lazy part of you, you're not telling him to go away, because he still gets to have his, we'll say, manifestation, but you're just saying there's a new sheriff in town, right? And you could still act, but you're not going to be the main driver of my personality. The main driver of my personality is going to be the goddess, right? And that's exactly what it means. It's going to be tefiti. It's not going to be tekka. And, that's the exact integration idea. That's the integration idea. So if you take this and apply it to across all areas, right, you're going to say, okay, maybe if I slept more, then I'm going to start acting more like the goddess. I'm going to start acting more like life itself rather than tekka. So there's this... It's this weird idea that maybe the same person that is this goddess is also the one that could wreak havoc. And this is the idea that we've been exploring this entire time. When you lose sleep, right? When you detach from something that, we could say sleep is life, right? Sleep is sort of like recharging your batteries, if you want to look at it from a basic perspective, right? If you detach from the necessities of life, then you have this negative manifestation, and that's something that you really see, often, right? There was a study on where they tracked employers, right? They tracked their sleep, and then they didn't tell the employees, and then they asked the employees, "How was your boss today?" And the employees rated their boss more abusive and and more tyrannical. I think tyrannical was the word, but it might have been something else. But more abusive and more tyrannical when the boss was on less sleep and they had no idea how much the boss slept the night before, right? And that's sort of how it is. It's like, the boss, when he detached himself from life, when he was low on his batteries, you could say, he was not himself, right? He was animalistic. He was highly temperamental and highly angry, right? And that's what you see. But if you get a good night of sleep, then you could think consciously, and you could be, we'll say, you could get in touch with the divine. So that's the idea that we've been trying to represent this whole time, and now I get the chance to finally explain exactly what it means. So you have this beast, right? You have this angry, mean beast. And if this were any traditional hero movie, pick the movie, the goal for Moana would be to fight this beast. Isn't that true? Doesn't Harry fight Voldemort? Doesn't, we'll say, Luke Skywalker fight the Sith? Doesn't, Batman fight the Joker, right? Actually, that one's a little bit abstract. Even like Batman Begins, right? The one before. Doesn't Batman fight Ra's al Ghul, right? The main villain. Don't you have in every single, Avengers killing Thanos? Don't you have that in every single hero movie? Simba killing Scar. Don't you have the hero killing the villain? And then we're happy about that, right? We feel good that the hero conquers the villain, slays the dragon, and emerges victorious. This movie says something different, and I like it so much better. There's an entire theory behind the hero slaying the dragon, and that's it's completely different. It's out of the realm of this discussion, but the idea of, it's kind of in the realm, so I'll explain it a little bit, right? So when you see something like Harry Potter versus Voldemort, it's a very good example, right? Harry Potter, as a child, he was, we'll say, inflicted with evil, right? There was evil that was brought upon him in the form of a scar, right? So, and throughout the time, he and Voldemort are connected, right? They're marked as equals. And the idea there is that Harry Potter and Voldemort are almost the same person, or at least they have the same background, and they have the same starting point. You imagine them as someone on a race, like they're both at the same point, and they both actually imagine a race would be too linear. Imagine they're in a maze, and they both start at the same point in the maze, and they both take the first same 20 steps, right? Because that's what happens. They both are orphans, they're both half-bloods. They both are incredibly, incredibly powerful, right? And they both excel in their class. So you have this problem that they're essentially the same person with the same backstory, right? And then you say, okay, so they took the first 20 steps in the maze and they're going in the same place. And then you ask the question, how does one end up like Voldemort, and then how does one end up like Potter? You imagine they're both in the same place. After 20 steps, they're both in the same place. And so the way of looking at it is one potential version of Harry Potter, right? Or Simba, or Batman Begins, Batman. Those are really good examples. Or Avengers. Those are all the same archetype. So one potential manifestation of one potential path that they could have chosen would be Harry Potter's path. Another potential path that they could have chosen would be Voldemort. So in a way, when they say that Harry Potter and Voldemort are marked as equals, right? And when we say that they're essentially the same person, or they could be the same person, it's true. Like, they literally are the same person. And they are both potential Harrys. That's the thing, right? So Voldemort is a potential Harry. If Harry were to go wrong, if Harry were to make different life decisions, he could turn into Voldemort, right? Or he could be Voldemort. And you see Harry struggling with this throughout the whole time. Throughout the whole movies, he has these, dark visions. There are times where he wants to, hurt Dumbledore, right? Which is like the ultimate good guy, you could say, right? He's sort of like the representation of God, and he wants to hurt Voldemort. He wants to hurt people, right? He sometimes he tries to do things that are called like the unforgivable curses, right? He does these things that are really, really, vile, and he has these really vile thoughts. And then you ask the question, and he struggles with this the whole time. He's saying, why am I so similar to Voldemort? Right? Why is that so true? And then the final, representation at the end, right? And this is the meaning of the hero slaying the dragon, and in this case, Harry killing Voldemort. The final representation is when Harry decides to kill Voldemort, he's killing off that potential him that he could be. Right? Does that make sense? So imagine. Well, that's one of the first things that's explored in Harry Potter. The first thing that Harry learns from Dumbledore is it's all about the choices that you make. So that's in book 1, and you see as you go into when Harry kills Voldemort, that's the representation of Harry literally killing off that potential path that he could potentially take, and that's the representation. So you imagine Harry Potter is the representation of the good ego, right? The ego expressing itself properly in the form of the hero, right? And that's establishing an individual understanding of self, right? Because we're going to make this a little bit more understanding to real life. So, we're going to say Harry Potter is understanding myself and having good values, roughly, right? And Voldemort is going as deep into myself as I possibly can, but having bad values, right? And choosing things that are anti-human, And, well, Harry has the choice, right? Because he's as powerful as Voldemort is. He's taken the first 20 steps in the maze, so the choice is, which one do you want to be? And when he chooses, that is... So we could say killing off the villain, right, is the ultimate choice, right? And not only choice in thought, right? So I could choose to go to the gym, right? But I'm not choosing. But that doesn't mean I gain muscle, right? Like choosing and doing, that is the ultimate representation of the hero, right? And killing off the villain. So when you say I am going to do something and you actually do it and you make that choice, right? That's like taking the correct next 10 steps in the maze. When Harry does that and he kills off Voldemort, the representation in that is that he has made the correct choice and he has pursued it, and by doing that he has chosen the path that will kill off the potential Voldemort and therefore he will not be Voldemort anymore. He has no potential of being Voldemort. And so that's the representation of killing the villain. It's complex, it's weird, right? It's a little abstract, but that's the fundamental idea. And then the idea there is you have good ego, bad ego. Harry Potter kills off the bad ego, and you could see that really strongly in The Lion King, right? In The Lion King, you have Simba kill Scar, right? Simba is clearly the representation of the good ego. So Simba could be king, right? And since Simba could be king, he could either be a good king or a tyrannical king, right? Those are the two choices, essentially, right? Obviously, it's basic because it's a children's story, but he could be a good king or a bad king. When he chooses to defeat Scar, he beats off the potential bad king that he could be, and therefore he chooses to be the good king, right? Super simple, and then he is the Lion King, right? And he's respected, and that all happens. So that's a representation of that, and therefore... So now let's relate this to Moana and see how they kind of relate, So we could say that when Simba or Harry Potter chooses to be the good ego and kill off the bad ego, he's choosing to be Te Fiti and not be the negative manifestation of ego, which would be Teka, right? So that's sort of the idea, right? The idea is you have a choice, right? You have a choice between which one of these that you want to be, and by killing off Teka, right, like a mean figure, then you choose to integrate then you choose to be the positive manifestation of that. I like it. I don't like it as much as Moana. Moana is a little bit more meaningful and direct. Direct's a better way of putting it. So the difference, right? So first we'll explain the symbolism behind Moana, and then you can see which one that you like, and then I'll explain the difference. So the whole thing is, then you have Teka sort of comes at her, right? And Moana says, "I'm not going to fight you." Right? She says, "I know your name," right? And obviously that goes back to the point where she says, "I am Moana," right? So she's like, "I understand you. I know what you are, and I'm not going to fight you because I understand that, you're divine, right? You have some sense of divinity in you." So the passion, right? The passion that the flames that come from her, the anger is sort of subdued, and she restores the heart to Te Fiti, right? And then you have this character that comes up, and you realize that Te Fiti and Teka are the same person. So the meaning behind that is something that I find more direct. I find better. It just works better. So you're to imagine you have a positive and negative manifestation of everything. So let's go with the idea of, let's see what we want to go with. We'll go with food, right? Food's a good idea because it works. It's universal. So with food, imagine that you have this underlying urge, right, for sweets, right? Because don't we all, right? Don't we all crave? We see food as something that is, energy, right? But it's also pleasure, right? Like we can't deny that, and we can't deny that there's a part of us that really enjoys food for pleasure. So let's say that if we, instead of looking at that as something to fight, right? Instead of looking at that as something wrong, how about we look at that as something something that emerges from you, and therefore it has some sort of value. So let's say that we take this need for pleasure from food. Let's go with that. So what do you do about that? Well, there are two things that you could do about that. Well, first you could fight it, right? And if you choose to fight it, then let's say you decide to go on a healthy diet, and that's the representation of only eating kale, right? Only eating kale and only eating, unhealthy food, completely healthy foods, right? No sugar, no whatever, right? And well, the problem with that is you end up most likely, suppressing it, right? That's like being Maui and trying to fight Teka, and then eventually what happens is you relapse, right? And this is something that we experience all the time, right? You look at it and you say, okay, I'm just not going to feel pleasure from food. I'm gonna be completely healthy, and then after about 3 months, your ego sort of, depletes, right? Your willpower, that's a better word. Your willpower depletes, and then that chocolate that's been waiting for you sort of just, finds itself in your hands, and you say that you're like possessed, right? You sort of, you weren't really in control of your decisions, and that's about right, because you weren't in control of your decisions, right? You tried to fight it and you lost, right? And when you lose, right, when consciousness, right, or willpower loses, then you gave up your control and your willpower to Teka, and Teka, we'll say, possesses you, right? And that's one potential, if we're going to the Harry Potter example, right? That's one potential manifestation of you, right? So we'll say that's the underlying cause behind the manifestation. So instead of saying that you're killing off the part of you, you're killing off the potential you could say, no, we're hitting it at its source. And the source is this desire, this impulse to life, right? Or this impulse to pleasure. So we have this underlying cause, right? And this underlying cause is pleasure, right? So one potential manifestation, right? So that's like starting at the maze, right? One potential manifestation is repression and most likely relapse. But some people end up successfully fighting it off. But we'll say that those people are very rare. And even if you do that, then you're denying life itself. And when you choose to deny life itself, then, well, what I've noticed is you get sort of like a kickback effect. And the kickback effect is you lose part of your spirit, right? There was a great metaphor. It was Emerald Wilkins. She used a garden metaphor. She imagined that every single aspect of your personality is part of a garden, right? Or we'll say every single desire that you have, to make it basic. Every single desire that you have is part of a garden, right? And we'll say this desire for pleasure is like the representation of tomatoes, right? And then you have your other desires. We'll say your need for sleep is mushrooms, and you have kale as your representation for being a good person or whatever, right? And you have, we'll say, 50 different vegetables, right? And when you decide to stop watering your tomatoes, which is essentially repression, right? Then either you lose, and we'll say that would be a representation of the Teka awakes, and you have mice or whatever, termites. I don't know what bugs come in and eat up the rest of your garden, but that's essentially what happens. You stop watering it, the soul dies, and then you end up the soil dies, and then eventually it sort of spreads to the other aspects. But if you just repress it, then you just lose a part of your garden, and therefore you lose a part of yourself. So either way, both of those, you really lose. The other representation is what Moana does, and this is the best way of doing it from a psychological perspective, from a mythological perspective, as well as Jung was a big fan of this, so I'm a big fan of this. So when you look at something like Teka, right? You look at something like this impulse to life, right? This pleasurable impulse to life. Instead of repressing it, right? Instead of looking at it like Teka, right, and repressing it, you could look at it like Tefiti, right? You could look at it as something that's beautiful, something to be sublimated, something to be beautified. And then what you can do is you say, I'm going to nurture this impulse. And even though it might have some inefficiencies, maybe inefficiencies is a good way of saying it. Even though this part of me might have some problems, I still want to treat it like it's a part of me. I still want to treat it like it has value. And this is what I do. This is what I do in my eating habits, and it's been very successful over, we'll say, the last 6 months to a year. Probably longer. I don't know, we'll say 6 months to a year. So for what I've been doing is I eat incredibly healthy throughout the week, right? And we'll say that satisfies my desire to have pleasure from, have substance from food, right? But every Sunday, what I do is I buy a little tub of strawberries, right? Just like a little, it's like a $3 thing of strawberries, and I take down the whole thing of strawberries, always. And I have no sugar throughout the week, 0 sugar or 0 added sugar. I have nuts, and nuts have like 1 gram of sugar, natural sugar. But every Sunday I take down a whole thing of strawberries, and that's how I allow myself to, for Teka, or we'll say Tefiti, right? In this case, if we're going to look at it like it's Tefiti, like it has some sort of value, then I allow that to manifest itself instead of completely repressing it. I don't choose to fight it, but instead I say, okay, I'm going to integrate you into a part of me, right? I'm going to integrate you into a part of my, we'll say, personality. And that's what Moana says, right? Moana says you could look at Teka as Teka, but don't fight it, right? Because if you look at it like Teka, which you shouldn't, right, then then you're going to lose. But the better way of doing it, and this is how the Japanese think, and this is how, like the Taoists and the Buddhists and all of them, they believe that you look at these natural impulses as something to be revered, and you integrate them as a part of you. And that's the representation of putting the heart back, saying, I am going to take life itself and put it back into my, we'll say personality, right? Or my world, right? My world, because we're saying Moana is part of your world, and therefore it is going to be a part of me, and I'm going to water that part of my garden. So that's the meaning behind that. So now we could take that and we could say, okay, how does that relate to the hero killing dragon myth, right? Because they're two sort of different things, but they're similar, right? It's a different step. So, right, because typically when we think of good and evil, right? When we think of good and evil, we think of, we'll say, something resembling God, right? And then something resembling the devil, right? And this obviously plays out in every single mythology quite differently, but that's kind of how we see it, right? And that's the idea of Harry Potter killing Voldemort. It's super simple. Here's good, here's evil, defeat it, right? And that's something that we innately understand, right? Like, of course that makes sense. But maybe it's not that simple, right? Like, maybe the hero slaying the dragon is like, well, it doesn't explain everything, right? It doesn't explain everything, and we've been kind of developing this idea as we go through, because if you remember, that is the original sin, right? The original sin of man, right, or the original sin of humans, is that we want to fight the dragon, right? That we want to fight the villain, and this is Maui's flaw. Maui says, I am going to be the traditional hero, and this movie says there's something wrong with that, right? And we're going to try to understand exactly why that is, and we've been developing it as we sort of go along, and we say that whenever we try to fight our animalistic impulses, you end up losing, first of all, right? You end up either losing, right? Or even if you're successful, you repress a part of yourself, because we'll go with the example of, let's see if I can come up with a good one. I made a list the other day. Well, we'll go with a more social example, because we've been working with like sleep, sex, and food, and these are the most basic functions. But maybe we'll make it a little bit more, complex. So one of the things that typical agreeable people really struggle with is they let people walk on them, like walk on top of them, right? Think of like the idea of a doormat, right? It's the person who somebody will violate their boundaries a little bit, or violate their privacy, or they'll start making fun of them a little bit, and they just don't say anything about it. It's like your friends start making like a little joke, and it starts to become a running joke. And all you had to do the first time, we'll say somebody started calling you stupid, right? Whatever. The first time somebody started calling you stupid, all you had to say is, hey, listen, I don't like that, right? Like, just don't call me stupid. And it's that simple. But what happens is then you're not confrontational enough, and you don't want to hurt the vibes or anything like that. Or let's say, you're in your house, and maybe your roommate leave something on the floor next to you, and all you got to say is, hey, listen, just, pick up your clothes. But you just don't do it, because we like to avoid conflict, especially agreeable people. We really like to avoid conflict. So let's say we're repressing a part of us, right? And we're repressing something that resembles life, right? We're doing something that we're getting rid of, in a more abstract representation, maybe we're getting rid of the natural flow of human interactions, right? Because the problem is, well, if you ever try to have any sort of relationship with somebody, right? Literally any sort of relationship, we'll go with a friendship here, there are going to be some negative moments, right? And you need to have those negative moments, because if not, then nobody sets boundaries and everything's just kind of good vibes, and then you have someone being too agreeable, which is exactly what's happening here. Somebody starts calling you stupid, and you say, okay, I really didn't like that they're calling me stupid, but I'm just going to kind of laugh it off and, see if it doesn't really play out. So in that case, you're maybe removing the negative aspect of conversations, which is removing life. So, well, also a big part of it is you're repressing your own anger, right? You're repressing your own feelings, right? And that's also a representation of life. So that's Maui pulling out the stone, and then what you have is you see something like Teka form, and Teka forms in the form of, well, maybe your roommate starts putting clothes everywhere because he started to test the boundaries, and he said, okay, he's not going to say anything, he's going to be a little bit of a pushover. Or maybe they start calling you stupid all the time, and then therefore you're going to get a little bit pissed off. You see this all the time in like supermarkets, right? If you ever see a parent with a kid, and well, if they're a good parent, right? If you're raising a kid correctly, then if a kid does something in the supermarket, which they shouldn't be doing in the supermarket, the parent actually should go up to them and say, should give them some small form of discipline, usually just the harsh tone of voice saying, don't do that, right? And by doing that, you make it clear to them, okay, this is the line, don't cross it, and then we could have a harmonious relationship, right? But what ends up happening, and this was from Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, what ends up happening is, one of his rules was, don't make your children do anything that makes you dislike them. And if you're too agreeable, and if you just don't stand up to them, right? Don't stand up to your kid, which, I tend to see that. You tend to see that all the time. Anytime you see a baby crying, right, in a baby or a child crying in a restaurant, like, they shouldn't be doing that. That means that the parent isn't doing their job in disciplining the kid properly, because, children should learn up to some point that crying is not what we do in a polite society, right? Roughly speaking. And so what ends up happening is, then in all three situations, so clothes, getting called stupid, and parents, what ends up happening is the person who's getting harmed, right, the person who got light removed from them, becomes a little bit resentful, right? They get a little mad. They're like, oh crap, like, I really wish this kid would shut up, or I really wish that they would stop calling me stupid, or I really wish that my roommate just put his clothes on his side. But you never say anything about it, right? Because we're so flawed, right? We're so flawed that we don't go up to the other person and say, hey, listen, can you please just put your clothes on your side of the room? Like, we just don't do that. So we let people step on over us, and then what happens is you repress your negative feelings, and, well, you bottle up your emotions, and you create something like Teka. So then the question is, what is the answer, right? Because that can't really be... Well, so that's the meaning of the Lion King, right? If you were to look into it deeply, if you're looking into the meaning of the Lion King says, well, you have Simba, right, who was raised correctly and was doing very well, and then he had some traumatic event, right? We could call it a scar, right? An emotional scar happens to him. And then you have Scar, right, who's scarred, right? And the reason behind why he's scarred, we have no idea, but all we know is that he carries his past with him, right? He hasn't been able to let go. That's the meaning of scar, right? So then Simba goes on this journey, and as he goes into the land of Hakuna Matata, right, and I dig deeper into this in my Lion King lecture, as he goes deeper into Hakuna Matata, which is sort of like running away from his kingdom, then he's still carrying the scar with him, right? He's still not very well put together, and he's still being hurt by the fact that his father died, right? And what must he do? He must overcome his feeling of, we'll say, resentment towards his father, right, and resentment towards himself, and also, his childish ways. He must overcome this, we'll just go with the emotional scar, and then what does he do in the end? He fights Scar, right? And then, obviously, when he defeats Scar, he defeats he overcomes his emotions, and therefore we have a a non-damaged individual, or someone who doesn't carry their past with them, right? So that's the representation of that. That's a good way of putting it. But let's look at it from a different perspective. We'll look at it from an integration perspective, which I find to be a lot more useful, right? Because the only thing that the Lion King says, roughly, is don't be resentful, right? Don't be resentful. Overcome it, and something like don't run from the past, learn from it, right? Something like that. It's not as deep as this. What it's really saying is, in this case, you have something like teka, right? And we'll go with the example of someone calling you stupid, right? Or we'll go with the 3 examples, right? Someone calls you stupid. So you begin to become resentful, and then you become teka, right? And maybe that comes out in an angry burst of anger, or maybe some gossip, right? Where you're just like, oh, I really freaking hate my roommate. Like, he's really pissing me off. And and that starts to bubble up within you, or maybe you just never say anything and you just get pissed because you get walked all over. So teka manifests itself in some way, and then the question is, what do you do about it, right? What do you do about it? Do you, in the traditional sense, do you just defeat your villain and just confront the problem, right? This would be the traditional way. Confront the problem, stand up to it, and then win, right? That's roughly what it means. And this one says instead, maybe, right? Like that's just not enough, right? This one says maybe you should integrate teka and tefiti. You should integrate this animal side of you and life itself. And if you integrate these 2 ideas, or if we're going to go with the traditional, if we're going to go with not the traditional sense, the realistic sense, right, applying it to real life, if you integrate your anger, right, or if you integrate, this would be something like monstrosity into yourself, right? If you integrate aggressiveness into yourself properly, then it can manifest itself properly. So instead of saying, hey, listen, maybe you should confront your demons, you say, maybe instead of doing it all in one action, maybe you should change your personality. Maybe you should change the underlying personality to integrate monstrosity, integrate aggression into you in a proper way. And well, the meaning of that would be sort of, well, when somebody steps on your toes a little bit, right? When somebody makes the first mistake, it's already a part of you. It's already a part of your personality, and then you just say, hey, listen, can you just put the clothes on your side, or put the clothes in the hamper, or can you, the parent goes up to the kid and says, shh, right? Like disciplines him on the spot instead of maybe becoming resentful of their own child, or if someone calls you stupid, say, hey, listen, I don't like being called stupid. Cuts it off right away. Done. You set your boundaries, right? And that's integrating monstrosity into your ongoing personality, right? Like throughout now, if you do something like integration, which this movie recommends is a good word because it does recommend. It says that you can integrate teka into you. You and teka and tefiti. So your normal, we'll say normally you're tefiti, and you integrate a little bit of teka inside of you. And we look down upon this idea of like monstrosity or aggressiveness. But I actually wrote a whole paper on this. It's like no, maybe we just need a little bit of it. And maybe it needs to be well socialized, because nobody likes a pushover, right? A pushover is somebody who is completely non-aggressive. Teka is not even a part of them. They have completely sworn off, we'll say, the devil, right? If you wanna say something like that, if you want to classify it like a devil, and then they're a pushover, right? And well, what do you get out of being a pushover, right? You're not the person that you should be. You don't. Well, I don't think anyone likes being a pushover. So the answer in this sort of integration idea is maybe integrate the devil and the we'll say God within you, the divinity within you, put it together, and then you have a fully formed being. And maybe they're the same person. That's a really, really beautiful idea, right? It's a beautiful idea. And then what's going to happen, right? So it says, okay, now that you've integrated this into a part of you, what happens? And the answer is the negative manifestation of whatever you've been repressing, right? In this case, it would be anger, right? Or not anger, confrontation, right? We'll say ongoing confrontation or monstrosity, right? That thing that you've been repressing, and that negative manifestation of it, which would be teka, which would be anger, screaming, gossip, like all these things, it would go away, right? Because now it's being integrated into one fully formed being, into Tefiti, right? So that's sort of the meaning behind it, and we'll get back to how that. So now we'll see how that relates to the traditional hero story, right? The traditional hero story is obviously kill off. Hero kills villain, right? Hero kills villain, and therefore kills off the part of himself that he could be. So we'll go back to this idea of the maze, right? So you have Potter and Voldemort. They essentially start at the same spot, right? They both have a really crappy childhood, and they need to, overcome that, right? And that's the same idea with the Lion King, right? So they take 20 steps, and we'll say that's the first 20 years of their life. Actually, no, we'll go with 10 years of their life. It's the first 10 years of their life, and they're at the same point, right? Voldemort and Harry Potter are at the same point, which is kind of scary, right? Because you could say, okay, on path A, the same exact person, one person could turn into Potter, one person could turn into Voldemort, and it's true, right? It's true. It's like, if you don't handle yourself properly in the world, then you could become evil, right? And there are so many ways of manifesting evil, but you can become evil. And, you could see, men who cheat on their wives or women who cheat on their wives. There's I think 50% of women cheat on their husbands, and 56% of men cheat on their wives. It's isn't that a form of evil, right? Even though it's not complete hero villain idea, it's you wrote a contract and you broke the contract, and the contract implies trust between you and your partner and the person that you committed to spending the rest of your life with, and you cheated. It's why does that happen? And we just answered the question. We're I don't know. I didn't want to be evil, right? I didn't want to cheat. It's just I was just kind of possessed by it, right? And you could say you're possessed by Teka, and that's the idea. You repressed a part of you. You repressed, we'll say, the part of you that wants to, either have sex with multiple people, which is, look up the Coolidge effect if you're interested in that, Calvin Coolidge, and or you repressed maybe some anger that you had for your spouse, and then what happens is it manifests itself in something like cheating, and you say that's evil, and I would agree that's something like evil. So and 56% of people do it, or we'll say 53 if we're gonna average it out. So 53% of people do it. It's maybe we're all evil in some sense, or maybe we all have this monstrosity. If you don't look at it like that, if you don't see that you have something like that, if you just kind of ignore it, then you have a problem, right? Then it's more likely to manifest itself within you because you're ignorant about it, right? I don't think when people sign their marriage contract, I don't think everyone says, there's about a 50% chance that I'm going to cheat, and that's not going to be me, right? So for the people who say that's not going to be me, it's you have a 1 in 2 chance of it being you. So maybe you should think about that a little bit more deeply. But so you imagine, right? You take 20 steps, and they're at the same point. Harry Potter and Voldemort, Simba and Scar, and you say, okay, there's one path where Harry Potter could be Potter, and there's one path where Harry Potter could be Voldemort, and there's one path where Voldemort could be Potter, and there's one path where Voldemort could be Voldemort. So the question is, what is it that makes the difference, right? And the traditional hero killing villain idea doesn't solve that. the traditional hero-killing villain idea says, well, let's zoom forward 30 steps to see that Potter took 30 good steps and Voldemort took 30 bad steps, and then they're going to fight each other and say Harry Potter wins, so you should take the 30 good steps, right? That's the traditional idea. I really don't love that because it says what happens in the 30 steps, right? How does Voldemort become Voldemort, and how does Harry Potter become Harry Potter? And movies kind of make up for this, stories kind of make up for this, where you have that like traditional idea of the villain, gives like three, he has the hero sort of like tied up and it looks like he's about to win. So what happens is he says his, evil diabolical plans for about like 2 or 3 minutes, and you see that in almost every movie where you have the hero like explaining who he is, because, well, then you could put a face on it and maybe we could try to infer what happened in that 30 steps, but that's, is that good, right? Like, what does that say? It says, don't be evil, don't be bad, and that doesn't really say much. It's like, let's see if I could come up with a good example. Avengers, right? One thing in Avengers is you have someone like Thanos who, he's a little bit sad because he realizes that overpopulation's a problem and it actually hurt him personally. So what does he say? He goes, I'm going to wipe out half the population of the world so that we could, essentially bring the population down so we don't have to worry about it for a while. And there's something that we feel that's wrong about that, right? Like, it just feels wrong. Like, killing off half of the people of the world just doesn't feel right. So the Avengers go and stop him, right? And then and then they kill Thanos. And what is the representation behind that? The meaning is, Thanos had this crazy ideology. Don't have that ideology and be the hero. That's all you got. But what does the integration idea says? The integration idea says, if you are both Harry Potter and Voldemort are at 20 steps, right? They're both at the same point. If you decide to integrate life as a part of you, right? If you decide to integrate it into your personality, right? And also, if you decide to integrate something like Tekka into your personality, if you want to, well, we'll just say if you don't want to remove the heart of Tefiti, which is exactly what led Voldemort to be Voldemort, right? That's exactly what Voldemort's problem was. He was, detached from life and obviously resentful and mean and all these things, right? So if you are to keep your roots with life, right? Keep yourself grounded and not let this negative manifestation of you, we'll say, emerge, right? And to get in touch with Tekka, integrate these ideas into your personality, integrate these personalities into your main personality, which is your ego, then you can end up where Potter ended up. You could end up in the right spot. So it gives an idea. It gives a path, right? It explains how to go on the path. It says integrate every aspect of you instead of fighting it. Right? That's the idea. And that's the reason why Potter and Voldemort split. It's because Harry Potter, you can see it as you go along, Harry Potter, him and Voldemort are essentially in communication the whole time, right? Everything, like, he could see what Voldemort's seeing. So Harry Potter's integrated the monstrosity inside of himself, right? He's integrated that part of him, and therefore he can emerge as good. But that's not the main idea. That's not the hero-killing villain, right? The main idea in Moana is exactly that. It says, okay, integrate monstrosity as a part of you, integrate life itself as a part of you, and then you won't become Voldemort. So instead of giving you the results, it gives you the process. And that's why I like the integration idea a lot more. And it's a lot more applicable, right? It's a lot more applicable because it says, for example, you have something like sleep, right? If we're going with the traditional hero myth, right, it would say there's the potential you that slept 8 hours a night, who's a good guy, right, and probably is, good guy or girl, and is probably, pretty good as a boss and as a person and as a member of society. And then there's the part of you that slept 6 hours a night, and you should kill off the part of you that's 6 hours a night. that sleeps 6 hours a night. Kill off that potential you. It's like, okay, that doesn't really help me much. But this integration idea says maybe you should take the potential you that could sleep 6 hours and understand him, get to know him, get to see what his motivations are, and therefore you can, then the negative manifestation of you, which would be, the angry boss, right? The person who slept only 6 hours, the angry boss who never really, who lashes out and doesn't get his work done, will never manifest itself. So it's a lot more applicable. It gives you the causal, it gives you a map, it gives you a path. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's probably the end of the integration idea, and then we just keep moving on. So, then Maui, obviously, he's done his little sacrifice here, so he gets a hook, and you could say life ends up, the goddess comes back onto the earth, and you could say life is restored, right? The heart of Te Fiti is restored. You can see this is her head right here. This is her torso, right? These are her legs. So that's pretty nice. And then obviously Moana, right? Now we finish out Moana's hero's journey. She goes, she reunites with her dad, which is great. And then here's the best part. She teaches her dad, right? She takes the lessons that she learned and then she integrates them back into society. And that's, that's the same idea of integration. It's like, okay, you take the person that you are and you take the society that is, and you sort of mesh them together and you say, okay, I'm going to make my society integrated, because we're so detached from the people that we once were, and we're not in touch with our adventurous self. So therefore we should probably integrate that into a part of ourselves, which is what a good hero does. And here she's showing her dad how to do that, right? So that's the idea of, we don't really have to get into it here, but that's the idea of pulling your father out from the belly of the whale, right? That's, she's rescuing her dad from the depths of his failure, right? Because he always wanted to adventure, but he wasn't able to break the mold, right? So since Moana broke the mold, he's able to represent that part of himself, right? And that's good, right? That's good. You see that idea play out in Star Wars, same thing, right? Like Darth Vader becomes Darth Vader, and then he eventually becomes a hero again. That's the idea. And then we have the final idea that really plays itself out. We had this symbolism before of the rocks really stacking themselves up, and security. Actually, no, this is the same idea as this one here, right? So you have security and stability have ruled the kingdom for years, but obviously, Moana takes her little seashell and says, I'm going to break the mold, I'm going to be different, and I'm going to represent a different part of myself that hasn't been represented through the generations, which is adventurousness, which is a different part of myself that the previous leaders have failed to do. So, and then that is the end of Moana. That is the end of Moana. Yeah. So I just wanted to. This is always where I end up giving a plug for my book. So the reason why I made this lecture series is because of this book right here. This is Break Your Bad Habits in 150 Pages: A Hero's Journey. This is a book that I wrote very recently, and it essentially says, we struggle with all the ideas that I've been talking about. Eating, smoking, lack of sleep, you name it, right? Like all these bad habits that we struggle with. It's the answers lie in these stories, right? The answers lie in being a hero. So I took the idea of the hero's journey, and I eventually, said, okay, I'm going to make this 150 pages, and I'm going to make it easy for people to become a hero in their own life, to take these ideas and integrate them into themselves. So if you want to be a hero like Moana, and if you want to be a hero like all of the amazing, maybe the traditional heroes, all these amazing heroes that we see all the time in these movies. If you want to act out this idea and you really want to follow, we'll say, your path, right? Then then buy my book. The link is below on Amazon, and become a hero. So that is the end of Moana. Thank you for staying on, and take care.